Black revolutionaries, distillery owners, Italian fashion retailers, and Motown Grammy winners all share their best stories never before told in any other media outlets on Detroit is Different. Visit DetroitisDifferent.com or download the Detroit is Different app on Apple's App Store or Google's Play Store.
All right, welcome back to the Detroit is Different podcast. We are back in the studios talking about this fight for justice. I had one guest, my first guest on this series, Corey Williams, where we talk directly about police brutality, and I'm sure these brothers will have a lot to say about that topic too. Someone I've known and knew his father. I got Kofi Kenyatta. How you feeling today?
I'm good. What's going on with you, brother?
Man, everything is everything in this madness. You know what I'm saying? It's almost like a natural response. You always say it's all good, but right now, the realities of what we know and the pressures of living in America and the tension is direct right now. It's thicker than it usually is, surprisingly, for most of America to see, as what we're witnessing through social media and also traditional media is abundant. And also you brought Chad. How you doing, Chad?
Making it through hysteria, man.
I feel that. Hysteria. That is the term that the great Dr. Amos Wilson would use. And that is one of the master teachers when it comes to understanding the racial dynamics of black and white people. I suggest reading any Amos Wilson, and if you don't feel like reading, Google him up on YouTube. You'll sit for hours if you find yourself enthralled in this. And you also have Neely Fuller. You also have Dr. Francis Cress Welsing and so many other master teachers about the race relationships between black people and white people, our oppressors, the people that enslaved us at one point in time. And then some would argue in some ways those same shackles mentally are still here in the vestiges of that. And in that, one of the number one primary things people say is we need to protect ourselves. We need to guard ourselves. And to the natural physical state of protection, you got Black Bottom Gun Club.
Yes, sir.
Black Bottom Gun Club is in full effect for Detroit is Different. I'm definitely not the biggest pro-gun person. I've never really seen guns resolve an issue. So we've had long discussions and debates about this before. And right now, as I see everything that's going on, this is a topic and a point of interest for many, many people. And I'm like, let's get Kofi, let's get Chad on to talk about this and what is important about our community being armed and being prepared for protecting ourselves physically with guns. And I'm guessing in other means as well. Martial arts have deep ties to our people as well. So let's start with right now with everything that's going on, physical safety and protection in that state.
Absolutely. Well, first,
what should families be thinking?
Say it again.
What should we be thinking? What should our community be thinking?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. But first, thank you for having us on the podcast. Black Bottom Gun Club is the Detroit chapter of the National African American Gun Association. National African American Gun Association was founded in 2015, and the Black Bottom Gun Club was founded in 2017. Actually, we have our 3-year anniversary coming up on July 14, 2020. Chad, you have anything else to add to the context of the background, how we got started with Black Bottom?
Yeah. So Kofi and I have a relationship from working together in other ventures, right? We started with the 180 program working together. Then from there, Kofi and I, along with some other friends, launched another nonprofit called the Buying Council. That was around for a little bit. And then in 2017, right when the verdict for Philando Castile from the officer, when he was cleared of all charges, we decided, I called Kofi and I was like, what is going on? What's happening? And then we saw a video from another gun rights organization, and it was really disparaging, in my opinion, about the urban community and black folks and the reason why black folks were in the street. It was really disparaging towards those people in that message, right? And so I called Kofi. I said, Kof, what's the move here? And he, at the time, he was an instructor with another organization. He took a stand on that. And then from that point, I was looking around for different organizations. I came across the National African American Gun Association, and I reached out to them. And after several discussions between myself, the president of the national organization, and with Kofi as well, both of us decided to start the Black Bottom Gun Club. We started with a meeting of maybe 10 people in August 2017. And as it stands today, we got about 115 members. A lot of the influx has come in as a result of the brutality and racism and murder over the last 60 days or so that we've seen with Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd. And it's unfortunate that that's the impetus for the attraction or getting involved with protecting ourselves. However, I'm not going to begrudge anyone's reason for doing so. If that's what spurred them to action, to be more self-determined, to take care of themselves and their family and want to be able to take care of their community, I'm with it. Our objective and our club is really to kind of steer folks in the right direction towards training and advocacy and blending those two things together.
And I think I was just going to add, I think what we're seeing now is what, everyone in this room has always known, is that we can't rely on the American government. We can't rely on its enforcers, the police officers, to protect black bodies. And so part of the reason we found the Black Bottom Gun Club is to make sure that our people are properly educated and trained in self-defense, and not just self-defense, but community defense, coming together to protect ourselves, our loved ones, not just from aggression from the state, but also from racist neo-Nazis that may attempt to come into our city, and the unwillingness or incapability of law enforcement officers to protect ourselves. We don't feel like we should outsource our security and protection to outside entities that historically have oppressed us. It is up to us, especially black men, and we definitely have a lot of strong black women in the club and in broader black society in general, but it's especially incumbent upon men to be able to protect our communities and ourselves and our families.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we are doing is, first of all, we aren't doing anything unique or new, because there is a black tradition of armed self-defense, right? Historically, we've always, as a people, have always engaged in armed self-defense when we had to, when we needed to, right? So just think about it like this. I mean, law enforcement can't get there in time, either due to physics, time and distance naturally, or, which is more historically accurate, unwillingness, incompetence, or outright malice to protect our communities. And so the black tradition of arms and the black tradition of self-defense fills that gap and fills that void where they can't because of time and distance, physics, or where they won't.
All right. So as you talk about historically, because we know Negroes with guns, we know so many different protections against revolutions. People know about what happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the first bomb used in an American city. Black Wall Street, as people would use the moniker. But there were so many different instances of people fighting against the Ku Klux Klan, officers of the law that were acting unjustly or unjustly. And I guess the question that I would say, when you talk about the historical context of then to today, in that process, you said Philando Castile, and it's so surreal that this murder of George Floyd happens in the same city. But the Philando Castile was another clarion call for so many black people across America to look at this and say, this is just sick, So starting there, moving forward till now, what has the response been in the community to the Black Bottom Gun Club?
I would say overall it's been pretty positive, meaning that people hear about us, they see about us, they see about some of the community activities that we've been in, whether it be providing free community-based safety seminars and legal seminars. We've gotten positive responses and feedback to that. And like I said, I mean, because of what's going on now, obviously our membership has shot up. I do want to touch on something when you talk about the history of stuff, right? Because you mentioned, Black Wall Street and stuff like that. One of the things I was reading yesterday or this morning was about the Hamburg Massacre in South Carolina. And I think it was 1871. And that happened because a group of racists and KKK. So Hamburg, South Carolina was just across the river from Savannah, Georgia, right? And there was a group of racist folks who came across, and they ran into a black militia in that city doing drills. And that black militia would not move in their practice doing drills, right? And so this racist militia took them to court and tried to sue them and all of this stuff. And then later on that night, this other racist militia who came with these it was a bunch of people with the last name of Butler, I recall, but they were known as the Redcoats, right? Ironically, the Redcoats. But then they came at night and got into a shootout with this black militia. Now, unfortunately, the black militia was overpowered and underarmed because it was like a bunch of these Redcoats that came over and took over that town. And that was one of the things that led to, number one, the end of that town of Hamburg, because Hamburg was a black city in South Carolina, right? But I think there are instances up throughout history where you'll see where black folks have done what we can to meet the threat of violence with self-defense. The thing is with black folks and our black tradition of arms, we aren't there to bring violence. We're there to defend against violence that's already present.
Yes.
Right. And I think that it's important that for black people to understand that us having guns isn't so much to enact violence. It isn't so much to terrorize our neighbors or our families or our communities or anybody else. We're not out there seeking problems. We're here to defend against the problems that come to our door and to our communities. What you said about Philando Castile was also interesting, is because I want to say the year after he was killed, the property values in that particular suburb went up 12%.
Wow.
So what we see in that, and I think that if you go back and look at similar instances, you'll see necrocapitalism. And when I say necrocapitalism, I mean the value of Black Death and how Black Death can be profitable to some people and to some entities, right? That's what I mean by necrocapitalism. And I think it's a really, really interesting subtopic when you talk about the history of law enforcement and policing as previously being slave catchers and defenders of folks' property.
Very much so.
From then up until now, that tract hasn't necessarily left. That mode of operation, that history is still present and is still active now.
Yes. And when you speak about that's I've never heard it put like that, necro-capitalism, but it also becomes the warning cry that this is not a safe place for Black people. As we know, the lynchings that we've all seen, the books, lest us not forget the work from Ida B. Wells, and you can Google this as well. But the lynchings were like baseball games where thousands would show up and look, but the body would be swinging on that tree much longer as a call out of knowing. The activist and great thinker Jimmy Boggs, who left where he came from down south to come to Detroit because of these things, and that's a hell of a sign. That's a hell of a sign, which kind of naturally moves me to put the ball in your court as Kofi, your history, your father being connected to the Republic of New Africa, which the existence of the Republic of New Africa was so built in so many facets of what would become a nation for our people. So Kwame Kenyatta, your father, Chokwe Lumumba, Gaidi Obadeli, Omari Obadeli, these great figures that have worked in thinking of what this would become. Can you share some of the theories from what your father, because in active learning the defense and that safety and that protection, because as you say, it's definitely never to be offensive. It's always to be defensive, but really protecting and about safety.
Yeah, absolutely. Before I get to that question, I do want to highlight one point. We're talking about history at this moment, and earlier you asked about the perception and has Black Bottom been welcome in this community, and history is part of that. It's about breaking the stigma of Black gun ownership in our community, and one way we can do that is through telling our history, telling the history of racist gun control, telling the history of Black armed self-defense, making sure and really evolving the consciousness of our people as it relates to gun ownership in our community. community, especially in Detroit with the crime rate as it is. Guns are violent, guns are bad, and that's what we are taught. And so to have men and women of the community who give back to the community, who also advocate for our Second Amendment right and carry firearms and educate our people, goes a long way to breaking that stigma, encouraging others to defend themselves in their community and get more active and involved. And so that's also a large part of the work that we do. As it relates to my father and his opinions, I learned earlier on not to speak for my father, even in death. But I think some things are known, and I also witnessed an evolution in my father. But one thing that didn't evolve, one thing that remained consistent, is his advocacy for armed self-defense. Malcolm X was one of his idols, and thus one of my idols. And Malcolm X was a brother that believed in self-defense by any means necessary. And my father actually absolutely believed that. It started off visiting him in the summertime and finding one of his firearms. And that's one of the reasons why we also pass out gun locks and making sure that firearms are stored properly. But at that point, he educated me on how to properly use a firearm and things of that nature, and why it's important that we defend ourselves and our community and not rely on others to do so for us. And so that having that experience as a young age, kind of helped me become acquainted and adjusted to the idea of carrying the firearm and utilizing the firearm properly for self-defense. The brothers in the Republic of New Africa, Malcolm X grassroots, all of them believed in self-defense, and all of them had entities within for that specific purpose. Not only protecting physically with firearms, but protecting themselves and the members from governmental influence that attempted to destroy from within those organizations, which historically has been present from Black Panther Party to any real progressive Black movement or people of color movement that was about uniting people. Unfortunately, is a threat to America, and infiltrators have attempted to destroy those organizations. So it's not just about protecting ourselves physically, it's about protecting ourselves mentally. It's about food security, it's about economic security. It runs the gamut. And so this is our particular lane. In my day job, my lane is economic security for Black people and people of color. And my personal belief, is that we have to cover all those lanes, and we have to do so in a coordinated effort. And so instead of throwing stones for someone for operating in a different lane and not focusing on your lane, how do we coordinate activities so we're making sure that we're progressing together as a people?
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So now with more of a historical lens and also a presence of now, what is it that you feel are some of the misnomers, the biggest myths that go on about guns in our community?
I mean, I think the easiest and most prevalent one is that a Black person with a gun equates to something bad, or equates to something that's criminal in nature.
Criminality.
Yeah, I think that's obviously the most glaring and easiest one. A lot of that stuff, and we can't entirely divorce ourselves from history, because the stereotypes generate from other folks in the past who impose those stereotypes upon us, right? Mm-hmm. So I always talk about Dr. Ossian Sweet from Detroit. He was able to successfully defend his home in 1925 from a racist mob when he moved into his new home on Garland. He was a dentist, right? Him and his family moved to their new home on Garland, and were met with like five nights in a row of folks trying to scare them out. Someone threw a rock or a bottle in his window and broke it out. And him and his family started shooting out the windows from the inside of their house into the house. Now, understand that Dr. Ossian Sweet, before that, he was a part of the 1919 race riots in Washington, D.C. when he was at Howard University. So he understood quite clearly what the fear of a racist mob could do to Black bodies. And it was for that reason why he was armed with rifles and long guns and handguns in his home, right? He was able to successfully defend his case with the help of, at that time, the NAACP. And the money that was generated from his case, in fact, started the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. And it's interesting that, as my brother was talking here right now, when you talk about the different organizations that play, it's interesting how the NAACP, at this point, to my knowledge anyway, does not advocate as much for Black armed self-defense in the way that helped get the Legal Defense Fund started, or in a way that where you have Brother Robert F. Williams, who was the president of the Monroe County chapter in South Carolina. He was the president of the NAACP there, and he established the Black Armed Guard, right? So it's a confluence of all of that history from us being able to defend ourselves and what we were defending ourselves against. Now you have this nexus of that history and this present where they seem to be opposed. Well, why does it seem to be opposed? Is it opposed because what we were defending ourselves from was the encroachment of white inferiority onto black bodies? I would say that's probably the case. And so the greatest stereotype, obviously, that we combat against is this thought process. Not even just, we don't focus on the stereotype of black folks with bad denotes criminality for white people's benefit. We do it for our own benefit, meaning that's a lot of internal work that we have to do in terms of showing ourselves that this is something that we have a history of doing, and it's something that we can do currently.
And keeping it 100 as it relates to our community and the stigma around firearms is because we experience a lot of trauma and a lot of death related to guns in our community.
Yeah.
I'm not in the streets. I've never been in the streets, but I've been to way too many funerals for people that I know personally under 30 years old, starting off in high school. And so when you grow up in that environment and your loved ones and your friends and family members are passing away due to gun violence, then you inherently, either subconsciously or consciously, develop an anti-gun standpoint because you've seen the destruction that it can do. And so when we talk about gun control, a lot of people first, their first mindset is to take away guns because they associate guns with that trauma, with that pain, with that death, instead of associating that pain, trauma, and death with the root causes of it. And so, you talk about poverty, you talk about the disparities in healthcare, you talk about the disparities in education, you talk about the disparities in opportunity, all of which creates a petri dish of fuckery, right? That create the condition that we see in inner communities. And so the real work is getting to the root cause of those situations, and doing the hard work is hard. It's going to take the community, it's going to take our elected officials, it's going to take everyone involved to get to the root cause of those things and uproot them and really put in some real true common sense solutions that will root ourselves of Black death. And so I think that's been a hindrance to others being willing to accept the concept of Black armed self-defense, but we continue to point that out. We can continue to advocate for getting to the root cause of the situations that cause us pain and trauma, because if we just continue to dive into a surface level analysis, our grandchildren will be having the same conversation. So we got to get to the root of it.
And in some of that, definitely the trauma exists. I mean, we're in my neighborhood I grew up in, guns and gun violence has been prevalent here, usually connected to something from the streets, the street economy, as they'd say, or as I would want to say and call it. And then also you have the myth of it as well. And the myth of it propagated by my favorite art form, especially in hip hop, But along with hip hop, American culture in general is very violent. You can watch John Wick, you can watch, I don't know, the Terminator.
You grab a history book.
grab a history book. Yeah, that's what you really can look at.
But but I guess I separate, and I guess they're interconnected. History being historical and culture, but even culture historically in America is very violent, as America has a violent culture, a violent past. It's a violent society. So like some of this myth and the understanding, as the talk always goes to, like, what's the mental capacity of a person and who is mentally fit to have a gun, and who determines the criteria of the mental test, because a lot of the anti-gun people are like, this guy's a psychopath, and then a lot of the pro-gun people are like, you can't get a gun even if you check every box and dot every I and cross every T. So the question I would go on to ask you all is coming up with our own community standards of what that looks like, or like a fitness check, because that trauma and that in the mentality, it can become chaotic. As I really think one of the most dangerous weapons is actually not a gun. I think it's a car. Mm-hmm. But we've seen that cause a lot of violence in our community as well. Mm-hmm. So, what do you all think? And should there be like a community standard? Should we all come to like some type of consensus, or what does that become?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good question. But I also want to start by saying that mental health isn't the predominant reason for violence, and whether it be the mass shootings that we see or violence in the communities, right? But since we're talking about mental violence, we also can't be reactive. So we need to make sure that our children are being fed emotionally, that they are receiving the proper emotional intelligence from school system, but starting first at the home. And so we start from the root up, right? And so we start grounding our kids, making sure that they have the emotional intelligence to not only handle a firearm as an adult, but function as a human being in our society. Yes. But, as it relates to our current situation, I don't know who, and I'm glad you prefaced it by saying, how does the community come up with the solutions? I thought you were saying that, the state should be deciding who's fit I think to own the firearm.
To rely on the state to say anything, because definitely when it comes to the state, who they may label as a felon, I see as an asset in my community. And I definitely know the whole relationship between felons and firearms is contentious in this nation. And the relationship between black men and felonies is more contentious.
Absolutely.
And I feel that's purposeful. And I think that deals with a lot of what you said, the socioeconomic conditions, if we want to go very liberal.
Absolutely.
But back to your other term you used, the fuckery that exists in this nation.
Absolutely. And I'm thinking more and more about your question around how does the community come together to develop those standards. And I think that's the end goal, getting to that position. I don't think we're there yet as a community, because in order to get to that point, you have to have interconnected communities. You have to have trust. You have to have the men not being afraid to walk out their home and talk to the youngins on the block. You have to have that. We had it at one point, and we have it in many places across the city, across the country, but we don't have that type of unity and togetherness as a community that we would need holistically to have that type of conversation around who's fit, who's not. I love the idea and the concept and the one-time reality of having a council of elders that had the respect of the people, that had the respect of the streets, that kind of came in and made those decisions for us. And I think that's a point that we need to get back to, but I think it's incumbent upon us, the younger generation, 20s, 30s, 40s, to put in that work to make sure that, when we become elders, we develop systems in place to where our youngins have to abide by those systems, or else,
And then the next question also becomes, as I live in this community, and I think this is American, and this is our community, black community, mimicking America. Mm-hmm. Also, the reasons when to carry and when to use, because I have a lot of homies wherever they go. It almost sometimes can get annoying, because you want to go anywhere, and now they want to hide their gun under their sack or whatever. I got to put it in my hat, and this is my CCW, so I can't go in this bar, or I can't go this way. But it's to the point where it's like, okay, I don't think you necessarily need a gun to go to the family reunion picnic personally, but you know what I'm saying? This is back to like values and standards and how we see things and how we approach life.
Get them.
So it's interesting where this is one of those things where it's an issue of a thing of value versus issues, right?
Okay.
And I think that for me, it's one of those things where if I can carry legally anywhere, I'm going to carry legally anywhere, right? It's not so much whether I need to carry legally anywhere, but if you want to talk about need, then there's a ever-present, omnipresent threat of racism and white inferiority for black folks, right? That's omnipresent. That's the world and the country that we live in. So if you want to talk about need, then ask Ahmaud Arbery, right? He was jogging and running, and he certainly could have used a firearm to defend himself when he was being accosted and chased by three racists. So I see it less of an issue of need and more of an issue of exercising your rights as a fully enfranchised citizen of this country. It's less an issue of need for me, again, because that's like saying, asking folks if they need to vote. Well, historically, and I'm always going to bring back history because history is still in the present because we deal with the effects of that history today.
Mm-hmm.
Historically, we were not allowed to read. We were not allowed to vote. We were not allowed to carry arms and defend ourselves. We couldn't even carry dogs or walking sticks at some point in some places, right? So those 3 issues.
I mean, we couldn't do anything.
Right. I'm going
to be property.
Right. I'm going to vote in every election, whether it's I write in a vote, whether I vote down ballot, whether I support a candidate who aligns mostly with my values. I'm going to vote in every election. I'm going to read as many books as I can, have my education, high school graduate, college graduate, working on my graduate degree coming in January. And I'm going to carry a gun just about everywhere. So it's more about exercising and engaging the responsibility of being a fully enfranchised citizen of this country where those things were denied us. I always tell everybody today and forevermore, we're going to claim every right that was denied our ancestors, including the right to keep and bear arms. And I think it's that serious and that important.
Now, this, I guess, goes into that different states have different laws about carry. Like, I don't know how many people that are listening to Detroit, if different, have been to Texas, but Texas is definitely one of those states where, in Arizona, you're gonna see a lot of firearms. Now, if I have my grandmother in a hospice care and I'm visiting her, and then I see black or white men just walking around with pistols, I'm gonna feel I would not feel comfortable with my grandma being there, and I know that that's a me thing. But furthermore, you know, as you are in some of those situations, does that impact you exercising the right, knowing that it may make others uncomfortable that you may care about?
I think it's important to be sensitive to how other people feel about your right to exercise things. I don't think that it means that you have to curtail that you exercise your rights, but be cognizant and aware that this may make some folks uncomfortable. And if someone's uncomfortable, there's a couple of things that can happen. It can be a conversation starter, right? If someone has an issue with it, then I can explain to them my position on why. It kind of creates an icebreaker for some of those things. If someone's uncomfortable with it and they don't want to talk to me about it, I can't control how they respond to what my exercises of my rights are.
So like a high school football game.
We can't carry on school property anyway.
If you just happen to, but you want to carry, it's a person that feels like I want to carry, because it gets back to the, like, if it's my right, even though they say that it's against the law, I still want to carry.
I mean, I'm a type of person, again, where I can legally do so, I will. But I think it also requires, being a gun owner is different than just being a non-gun owner, I guess I'll put it, in that there is a level of responsibility that you have. There is a level of awareness that you have to have. There is a level, you're held to a higher standard. In most cases, for me as a CPL holder, I'm held to a higher standard than law enforcement if I choose to deploy my firearm to defend myself, right? So I think that you have to have a certain level of discernment, which I would say is knowledge and wisdom, knowledge applied with wisdom. That's what discernment is in my book. I think it requires a level of discernment into how you exercise your rights. Like, I'm not,
we following the laws of this land that we already feel like is against us, but we also recognize that we're here. So I honor you, because it's certain rules and laws in this land that I look at and I say that shouldn't be honored. Now, do I exercise against it? I'm incriminating myself. Maybe not. It all just depends.
Right.
But it may be people that feel like differently about this. And this kind of goes back to that stereotype of, like, growing up in a neighborhood like this where the guns are more criminality. It's like they're tools used to intimidate or murder. So it's like I don't see the gun, kind of what Kofi was saying, as a tool of safety as much as I see it as a mechanism, which also kind of goes to that other point. I don't know. It's not a lot of registered firearms that I'm seeing around here. The gun that's being used is usually an unregistered firearm, So it that raises that anxiety, but that same anxiety, as you say, just being a black man in society, yes, it's high. Well, so when you talk about the Ahmaud thing, I think Georgia suburb, yes, it's high. I think in some ways, if I was black man with gun, if I was black man jogging down the street and they know I got a gun on me, it may be even higher. because now I think that I don't even have a chance for discourse. So I think the safest place may be where, like, if America says it's unsafe, that's probably the safest place for me as a black person.
True.
If you were a mod in that situation and you going for a jog and you notice 3 white men in hot pursuit of you, would you rather have been unarmed or armed in that situation?
I definitely would have rather been armed. But I also think that if it was known, like, meaning like if I make that jog often, but this is just my stance. First off, black people in the suburbs, more power to you, and you got a lot more courage than me, because I'm way more afraid of my white neighbor in the suburb than I am my ghetto neighbor in the hood. My ghetto neighbor in the hood, I feel like I got a context for the hood things that go on. You know, like even my break-in that was recent. Like, it's a context for this. I don't know the context for the violence out there, you know. So, like, if I'm a mod, yes. In that situation, yes, I definitely am. But also in that situation, if I feel like my white neighbors are aware that I have a firearm or firearms, then now whatever little discourse that it could happen has just escalated to a heat is on situation.
Yeah, and I also want to be clear that, at least me personally, I'm not advocating that every black person walk around with a firearm, right? I know that's not a realistic expectation. Our goal is to educate, put the information out there for those that are like-minded, so we can build that community. And, you know, we talked about staying in our lanes, sticking to our lane. That's our lane, right? Knowing for the fact that, you know, there are other lanes. People may not be comfortable carrying firearms, but they're putting in work for our people in a different way, right? And so we're just trying to build that muscle for a lane that we saw that was missing in our community, that conscious, the community-rooted black gun owners, right? And so we saw that was a gap that was missing in our community. We're looking to fulfill that gap. And now there's a lot of other gaps, right, that need to be filled. But this one was more pronounced, especially given our history. And we wanted to fill that void. Not saying everyone, you must come over to fill this void with us, but more so, we are here. This is why we're here, just so that narrative doesn't get misconstrued, and knowing that we are down for our people, even if we disagree on firearms in general, know that we have the same end goal of black liberation and protecting ourselves and our loved ones. And so, you know, that I just wanted to, you know, make sure that it's clear that we're not trying to say, Kari, you're stupid for not carrying the firearm. That's not what we're saying. We're just saying that this is why we do it, and this is how we see it fits into our collective goals.
And I do think that being here in America, these are some tough questions. So as I'm asking you the questions that are tougher, because I think that the people watching will have this as well. And I don't necessarily think that not having the firearm is the right thing too. I'm looking at all the protests and I'm thinking to myself, should these people have firearms or should they not? I don't know. You know, I don't know. In some instances, if 15 riot gear cops come up and they bash somebody's head in and I'm one person with a firearm, yes, I would feel like defending that person. But then I'm going to think, what are these other 14 cops about to do to me?
For sure.
And I don't know if it's an answer to that.
It is an answer. You know. We all know.
I know what they're going to, but meaning like, is there
what choice do you make?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. What choice to make?
Well, I think that's really one of the key problems that we face. Why is it that we're the only group in America that has to make that determination between protecting yourself, your family, and your community versus imprisonment or death? Right?
Damn, that's deep. That's deep. Chad.
Like that's the question. That's the question that we're faced with all the time as black men and women who carry firearms. But back to Kofi's point, it's not that we want everyone to carry, because we understand that everyone probably can't and shouldn't carry, right? At the very least, we want you to be okay with the ones that do. Not so much that you have to carry yourself, because for whatever reason you don't want to, whatever reason you can't, that's on you. That's a personal decision, just like this is a personal decision for me to carry. But at the very least, be okay with me carrying and understanding why I carry, because at the end of the day, I might have to save your life.
I feel that.
And willing to do so.
And be willing to do so, right? But yeah, I think that justice is not some type of a naturally occurring phenomena. It's one of those things that it requires human intervention, and it requires folks who are willing and able to bend the moral arc of the universe towards justice. It doesn't
for
point
us here.
Yeah,
for us here in America as Black
Yeah.
people, it requires a lot more, even almost that, like, in that act of bending that wheel.
Yeah.
We've seen what it takes, because really a lot of what people are getting their heads bashed in at peaceful protest right now is just over the facts of justice and fairness. They're not asking for an advantage. They're just saying, hey, if a cop kills a citizen, can that person go to jail? Can they be punished? Because I'm like, man, it gets under my skin when they say black on black crime. I've seen a person black on black crime, and I hate that term even, but I've seen a black man shoot a black man and go to jail for it.
Yeah.
We rarely see a cop shoot a black man and go to jail for it.
Yeah.
That's what the fight is about.
Yeah.
So if it was justice and square, now it, as you say, the consequence and the penalty of imprisonment. So we're looking at, okay, am I hoping and praying that I live and survive after being demoralized and possibly beaten to death? Or do I stand up for myself and face imprisonment and still possibly take the risk of being beaten to death, and abused as well? Like, these are shitty options. And that fight for justice that you speak of is so present for so many. Like, usually I try to just ask questions and stand off, but in this fight for justice series of Detroit is different. I'm running in thought, and it's great to have you guys here.
Yeah, man. You speaking, and what keeps running through my head is buck breaking, right? Back during slavery, where there was a slave, an enslaved African, I should say, that fought back or ran away.
Yeah.
And they were captured. They would set an example of that brother or that woman, and they would bring all the other enslaved Africans and watch them torture that one brother and emasculate him and do all kind of depraved things that we probably couldn't even think of on our own, to set the stage and set the tone that this is not what you do to keep the other
God
to put
in
the
others. I mean, this is why when black men were lynched, their testicles and penis were cut off and put into their mouth.
Yeah.
This is why.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So like this, and then pour tar on and burn.
Absolutely.
Like this type of sickness, and this isn't that long ago. This is like 1900s. This isn't like,
it's like last week.
Yeah,
it's like last week.
Yeah.
It's just a different form.
Yeah, it's a different form.
we see
I mean, the
on
actual
our
act, but yes,
I'm talking about the actual act. I'm talking about the actual lynchings. I'm talking about Ahmaud Arbery. I'm talking about Mr. Floyd. Talking about all that. This is a modern day lynching.
Yeah.
And then they posted on social media and on the news, and so subconsciously, it's been ingrained in our mind that even though we fighting against it, subconsciously,
this is
the world is saying that this is okay. They trying to butt break us, and so, my. I won't get into my position on that, but that's the reality of the situation, right? And I think we need to do something to remedy that.
And being prepared with security of not just firearms, but you say like we talked about food security.
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm. Economic security. Definitely in what you're teaching children. I almost walked away from saying education. I say knowledge because education seems to be so weird. But let's say education, and also the mental state.
Education. Yeah.
Also the mental state as we're experiencing so many of these traumas. It's said that if you have an alcoholic in your family, that can last for 4 generations in your DNA.
Wow.
So I can only imagine if one alcoholic can last 4 generations. As there are more and more studies, but it's not a lot of money, obviously, funding the post-traumatic stress disorder connected to enslavement.
Yeah.
But what's going on in our DNA, and that also just shows the phenomenal nature of who we are as a people.
It's interesting you bring up the post-traumatic slave disorder, post-traumatic slave syndrome, or post-traumatic stress disorder, whichever one you want to call it. So they were doing studies with Jewish Holocaust victims where they found epigenetic trauma in their DNA passed from Holocaust victims and survivors onto their descendants, right?
Yeah.
And it alters their DNA and RNA. from just Holocaust victims till now. That same thing occurs with formerly enslaved black folks in America, in that you have a legacy and generations of not just enslavement, but the Jim Crow laws and all of those things, and the discrimination, both economic and physical, where those things alter the DNA in black folks to get us to where we are now, right? That's the epigenetic trauma that we deal with, right? It took generations to embed into us today. It's going to take that much or longer to get out of our system. But I also want to touch on the fact that you mentioned something else about the lynchings and stuff and how it was a sickness. I'm not going to disagree with you that it's a sickness per se, and that every generation kind of has a choice in order of whether they decide to carry on that mentality or not. But there's a choice to a degree. But I also think that white folks face that same epigenetic trauma as well, in that you have a legacy of slave ownership or enslavement. You have a legacy of carrying out discrimination and racism. I wonder if we got the bad end of it in terms of the epigenetic trauma from enslavement. What type of epigenetic trauma do they have in terms of being evil?
Yeah, I mean, definitely sounding a little bit like the brother minister Louis Farrakhan. I would say that my belief, and you say it's white inferiority, but in my terms, I would say white supremacy is existent in all white people, and black inferiority here in America, and really white supremacy is global, is existent in all of us as black people. It's all, I think it's depending upon what dynamic and what's happening, and how learned of people you are, not necessarily books, and really what those dynamics are.
Yeah.
I mean, so like it's been so many examples, and I usually use like examples with celebrities because it's hard to say Fred that owned the shop, but for instance, Donald Sterling, the former owner of the NBA Clippers, multiple NAACP awards, hired the first general manager that was black, one of the first black general managers in the NBA, one of the highest ranking positions you can have in the NBA, but made a statement about, the girl he was dating not wanting to take pictures with Magic Johnson, and just also happened to be taped in that. And I think that was part of an extortion. So that was put on a grand scale to say, this shows his racism here. Whereas it's like, okay, in certain dynamics, yes, in certain dynamics, no. But then you see the structure of the NBA saying, we're going to enact and we're going to make sure we do something about this. But what the NBA did in turn was they allowed him to sell his team for the most any sports franchise has ever been sold for, ever. So the NBA walks away saying we did something about our race problem by giving a billionaire another $1 billion.
Yeah. I'm glad you spoke about the structure of it all. Personally, I could care less about racial prejudice, right? Yeah. It's the systems, it's the systemic racism, systemic oppression, that no matter who's heading up that racist organization, you can cut the head off. But if the system is strong, if it's interwoven, then that system will last on. And so we have these racist systems in every facet of American life. Yeah. And so, how do we untangle that system? They talk about doing some unconscious bias training. Nothing wrong with that. But that's on the individual level. Yeah. Where's the unconscious bias training for entire systems that we really need to get to in order to see meaningful change from the system perspective? And now we all know that, we may not be alive for that to happen. Yeah. And we also need to focus on what we're going to do outside that system to make sure that we can survive and thrive. But I also think we need to talk about that when we talk about the whole notion of racism. It's not just about the interpersonal. The big beast is the system and the implications of that system.
Because the interpersonal is that's the in some ways, I believe that those interpersonal actions almost hide other racists, because now they can point to like, okay, I'm not Ty Cobb, but it's like for Ty Cobb to exist, then the system has to support that.
Yeah, you're talking about liberals in a sense, liberals and progressives who aren't as vocally racist, right? They aren't, No, I wasn't.
Well,
Saying you're not white
I
supremacy.
think I believe the direction you're going. Like, you know, it's,
Mhm.
right now it's like a broad brush
Exactly.
of like Republicans are racist, the conservative viewpoint is racist, the Confederate flag, they support all of these backwards standards, which is, and it's funny, you know, kind of going to the ideology of the statehood of like, you know, we want to basically be able to do what we want to do, how we want to do, and what we want, because they can no longer be our property, because that's what a lot of this is, and they, meaning us, black people, and we don't want nothing to do with them. Whereas I think a more, the liberal viewpoint is, we don't want nothing to do with them unless they go through these systems, but I feel some pity for them, and we'll try to create and coddle these systems that will allow a couple of them in.
Yep.
But it's still not the independence. It's not the black empowerment. It's like, it's still, you know, jumping through loops and like, you know, being a tiger to, you know, like a or a field puppet or whatever to live in a system that is their world, as opposed to saying, let me back off and let me let you do what you do.
So,
it's not for me to understand the context. If you all want to, you know, it's not for me to you know, give you the Bill and Melinda Gates scholarship. It's not up to me to decide who the best student is. It's up to me to go to the school and say, hey, here goes some resources, and distribute it however the hell you want.
Get out the way.
So I want to touch on a couple of things. What you're talking about is this constant back and forth. You know how some people like to call these ideological differences among liberals and conservatives, were like deep state or whatever deep state are. Yeah, right. All deep state really is a fight between which version of white, or which flavor of white inferiority you want to go with. And I use white inferiority because you have to have an inferiority complex to believe that you better than anybody else, right?
Deep.
So that's why I use white inferiority instead of white supremacy. Right.
Gotcha.
But yeah, that's really the conflict between which version of white inferiority wants to rule the day. And when you talk about different liberals and conservative, look at the woman in Central Park, right?
Yeah.
Who weaponized her whiteness, her white womanhood.
Yeah.
Right, because that's what it was, a weaponization of white womanhood to try to get this black bird watcher arrested or potentially killed in Central Park.
Definitely.
Right, that's exactly what that was. But
that's
yet,
exactly what it was.
She's on record as being a donor to Obama and Hillary Clinton and Democrats and stuff. Right.
Yeah.
So I think what Trump has done, and I don't want to delve too much into politics or my personal ideology, but I think what Trump has done and the conservative movement has done right now is really made it really, really easy for folks who consider themselves progressives or liberals to point at the bad guy.
Yeah.
Right. And give cover for their own bias or racism.
But it's never about any individual. It's breaking down these damn systems.
Yes.
You know, As you know, so it's never about the individual.
It's never about that.
Look at it as an individual. You know, if I ever, as a black man, felt that Joe Biden is about to save my life, and I'm going about life backwards as hell. You know?
Facts.
Now, do I think that if he has an agenda and from a federal policy standards, and he has something specifically for black people that he has designed, could it be something that could eventually matriculate and offer resources to our community? Yes, it could. But I definitely am not going to think that Joe Biden is any savior for the black community.
Not at all.
You know, I don't think Lyndon Baines Johnson was a savior for the black community.
Absolutely.
But one thing that, and I think maybe the political tone, as I read history, says it, you know, as he told Martin Luther King, you're going to have to make me do this. You know, which that's still more to me of a transactional nature of what politics is.
It's an exchange.
And I can understand that a whole lot more than the ideology of things will get better, not having plans, having like the idea of, you know, it just won't be as bad. It's better to be transactional. Like, look, I'm not going to do nothing unless you bop, bop, bop. And then it's like, okay, now we can say, this is what we need to focus on. And this is what we're going to get.
Yeah, politics is an exchange, and it's not charity. And I think for too long that, unfortunately, we've used giving our vote away as political charity.
And some of that also, I would say, is by design, using your term, through the white inferiority, as some of the best gambit of trickery has been thrown at our people. You know, to the point of like, you know, to the point of one of the examples that I always use that just shows the phenomenal nature and the talent and the creativity of black people. You know, Lou Alcindor at the time, but Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, when he was going to go to college basketball, what they did was they made the dunk illegal. And that's when he developed the most unguardable shot in basketball history, the skyhook. You know, but it's like you're dealing with stuff like that because it was like, oh, we can't have this guy scoring this many points. You know, so it's things like that every step of the way. Like the rules change, and like what Kofi said, we have to be prepared and we have to know rules are going to change. We can't expect things to remain static because this system is not designed to give us resources. So as those rules change, we have to think steps ahead and steps behind. We have to be moving fluid all the time, almost like Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker or something. Like we just moving around the ring. Like we can't sit and say, okay, this will happen and then, you know, that will happen. As I do believe that the election in some ways, and I was one applauding it too, but the election of Barack Obama was almost like a paralysis state for a lot of black folks because it was like, wow, we've arrived. We got a black man in the White House. I know he'll advocate for us. And that did not come about.
We're in a difficult situation, and everything. Every topic we talk about, we're in a difficult situation with Barack Obama. Is that you're absolutely correct. Part of that is because of the amount of racism that was coming his way from the right. So it was like he getting all this heat just for being a black man. I don't agree with what he's doing or what he's not doing, but if I add to that, how that's gonna look. And at the end of the day, I'm a black man, and this is a black man.
And that was the paralysis that a lot of black America was under at the time.
Exactly. And I mean, same thing with Biden, though, right? It's like the option, the racists on the right, well, the racists on the right are giving cover to the racists on the left, right? And so it's like, well, look at Trump. He's worse. So, hey, let's get through this and get Biden in there. And then, you know, 4 years later, there'll be a new boogeyman.
Hope we have a black woman.
But at the same time, we also can't say, you know, at least I don't say let's sit out and not vote. Let's take a stand and let's you know, shove it to the Democrats. Let Trump get in because his policies, I believe, will be more dangerous to black people. Even though I don't know if Biden's policies will accelerate social economic mobility of black people. So again, I talk about being a system as mitigating damage. I look at Trump as Biden as mitigating damage from a possible Trump. And I know we don't want to get into politics, but also because this is an election year, I think it's important that we message at least the right things.
I agree. I'll never advocate that anyone not vote for any reason whatsoever. I think that every election is important, including your local ones. I think the local ones are going to be even more important than the national one because the local ones determine what happened in your block, on your block, in your community, in your city, in your state, right? So I'm going to advocate for every election that black folks participate in if you're able to. But I do think it's important that we not give away our vote as charity going forward, meaning to Brother Kofi's point, we got a boogeyman here who's far more of a monstrosity than the vampire over here, right? So I think that we have to take account for both of those type of things and which one you want to deal with. Now, had we been a little bit more, I guess, had we been a little bit more politically strategic earlier on, we probably could have got a different candidate that's going against Trump right now than what we got.
Possibly.
Right? But
possibly
so.
Seen some of these systems, and I guess I would argue that I'm not against the person that's for apathy. You know, I understand the apathy argument.
Absolutely.
Like how you feel about the like, look, I'm not going to try to force a person to get a gun.
Yeah.
I'm not going to force a person to try to vote.
Right.
The apathy argument has a lot of valid points.
It does.
Black in America.
It does. But I think the other piece of that is important is that when you're registered to vote and you actively engage in voting, you also have the capacity to be selected for jury duty. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something a lot of folks either don't pay attention to or don't recognize is that your voting, whether you vote or not, or whether you register to vote, that has a direct impact on how you can exercise your other right in that second box, to quote Frederick Douglass, right? Because he said a man's rights rest in 3 boxes: the ballot box, the jury box, and the cartridge box. I advocate the access to all 3 of those boxes, right? Ballots, which in turn will allow you to be in the jury box, and then the cartridge box as a last resort when nothing else is left. And that's kind of our space in that third box, right? But all of the other two boxes and every other box is important for us as well. So I would never tell anyone to not vote. I understand the apathy. I can support them on the reason for their apathy. But even if they choose not to vote for a particular candidate, one or the other, I would suggest at a very minimum, look at your ballot and see who's on for local elections. Look and see what proposals are going to be in your city or your state that may impact you directly. That stuff is important too.
Yeah,
absolutely,
very much so. Which kind of brings me 360 back to the gun club. Let's just get some brass tacks out. How do people join? How should a person be a member? Should I own a gun before I join? If I'm interested right now, it's like I don't know what's going on. What's happened? How do I join?
So, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, you can tag in. First step is join the National African American Gun Association. You can find all this information on our Facebook page, Black Bottom Gun Club. Also go to the website, blackbottomgunclub.com. Yeah. But in order to join the club, you have to be a member of the National African American Gun Association. It's only like $25, for an individual, and a little bit more annually for an individual.
$25 is not a lot of money.
Well, it's $29 annually for an individual, $39 for a couple, and I think it's $60 for a family of 4.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And once you're a member of the national organization, you can send your confirmation and then forward it to our Gmail at blackbottomgc@gmail.com. And then we'll follow up with more information on how to become a member of our club. We do hold meetings every second Saturday at 11 a.m. We were doing virtual meetings given social distance orders and the pandemic, but next June 13th, we'll be at the Firing Line gun range in Westland, which is our home range. And I'm pretty sure I forgot some other stuff, Chad.
Yeah. No, that's really it, man. To join the National African American Gun Association, that's step 1. That's step 1. You go to naaga.co, not .com, but .co. Yeah. That's the website for the national organization. Then from there, you can reach us at our Gmail or go to our website, blackbottomgunclub.com or blackbottomgc@gmail.com. Email your confirmation and we'll get you tightened up.
Do I need a gun?
No, you don't need a gun.
Okay.
A gun, having a firearm is not required. You just need to be able, if you choose to, you need to be able to have the capacity to get one legally.
Okay.
We do have a black federally licensed firearm dealer in the club. So if you are looking to purchase a firearm, come to us. We'll make sure that we keep those dollars circulating in the black community. I don't know if we make any firearms yet, but
no, we don't. Well, there's a few, just not here.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Just not here.
All right. So when I join the club, is it more like a social gathering? Is it teaching? What's happening?
It's somewhat all of that, right?
Okay.
I mean, we typically, quarterly, we have a firearm expert come in and talk about different issues surrounding firearms and legal system, right? Okay. So we do that not even just for our club members, but we also do that for the community as well. So whenever we have him come in, those are meetings that are open to the public, or we'll have separate events where he'll come out to a church or a community center and talk about gun laws relative to what you should and should not do or can and cannot do, and answer any questions you have. So we talk about legal stuff. We also talk about the history of the black tradition of arms as well. When we don't have a presenter, we'll talk about somebody like Stagecoach Mary, or we'll talk about Ossie and Sweet, or we'll talk about Hartman Turnbow or Janie Brewer. If y'all want to look up these people online and see who they are relative to the black tradition of arms. W.E.B. Du Bois and his position on firearms, right? Read his position on firearms relative to the 1906 Atlanta race riots.
Yeah.
So we talk about a lot of history and that stuff too. Going back to what Kofi was saying earlier, is that We believe that the history of the Black tradition of arms is broad enough and is a wealth of information that can inspire you. History is supposed to be an inspiration for what we do today. It's not supposed to be the motivation, but the inspiration for it. And that's the track that that's the approach we have. But in addition to those things, we discussed the community service engagement. So to your point earlier, when you were saying there's people who might not be comfortable with seeing Black folks carrying guns, well, part of our community engagement is to get people comfortable with Black folks carrying guns while we're passing out safety locks, or while we're conducting food giveaways or mask giveaways or whatever the case may be. That's kind of part of that rehabilitation relative to Black gun ownership that we try to engage in. But in addition to the community service stuff, we also have training events as well. We have instructors in our group who do everything from basic pistol and CPL stuff all the way to defensive handgun. And we got trainers from out of town coming up this summer to do a community defense day where we're going to be going through rifles and shotguns, right? Okay. So we kind of run the gamut in the space of Second Amendment advocacy.
All right, and that kind of leads to like some of my understandings as, I'm not a gun guy. But growing up in this neighborhood, you become aware of certain gun rules. So like if I don't have a gun, I mean, am I able to use somebody else's gun? And am I thinking like, I don't know if I want this person's fingerprints on my gun? Like what happens there?
Yeah, during our monthly meeting, we go to the range after the official sit down and talk meeting is over with. And so at the range, you can get a gun. I mean, you can not purchase a firearm, but you can lease a firearm to rent to shoot that day. There are also members who may be willing to let you shoot their firearm as well. And so the idea is to gradually get people used to firearms ownership. And so even if you don't have a firearm, we'll make sure that you get, if we just start with the in-classroom teachings around gun safety before we go to a live range, that's part of the process. So, once they come in, we'll take care of them.
And you just enlightened me. I didn't even know you could lease a gun, but that makes sense.
Yeah. For the duration that you're in the range.
I know, actually. Yeah, I'm pretty sure
can't lease it, put in.
Like, let me lease this gun and then go down the street to the bank. So, I'm pretty sure that's not happening. So, also, like, in reference to that, the role that you all play, because I'm guessing, as people know, that you are a part of a gun club and willing to be in the community. Do people ever ask of the gun club to provide any security services, or like are members interested in providing like maybe security patrols and things like that?
Yeah, that's something that we were just talking about there. We have gotten that call. Part of what we want to do is continue to raise the consciousness of the club members to move from, not just self-defense and self-defense of our families, but also defense of our communities. And so I'll say more to come on that.
Okay. Yeah. And then also, just for those thinking that aren't a part of the gun club, can you just share some of the laws on that? As the Second Amendment right, I was having this discussion the other day. I mean, it leads with militia, so like you have the right to have a militia against you probably can know it verbatim, but with that being said, if it's another group of men in the community, as we know the classic story of the LA rebellion in 92 that we were all really young for, but the Korean business owners all got a bunch of guns. That's the narrative
top of the roof.
Spoken about. But if a community saw what was happening in Philadelphia a couple nights ago, the bunch of guys with bats, or what was happening in Bronx on Dykeman, a lot of the Dominican families seem to be having some not being violent towards a lot of the Black people there. So what?
Same thing in Chicago.
In Chicago, I'm hearing about some of the Mexican family peoples, more so the Latin Kings, having acting violently towards Black people there. So with these actions, if a community wants to stand up and say, look, these 15 adults on the block gonna all buy a gun, we're gonna have our own militia, what should they do? Can they do that? What should they be thinking about? Like, can you give some advice or some theory or like ideas on like how to make sure that doesn't get crazy?
I don't think a group of neighbors necessarily have to call themselves a militia. to come to the understanding that they are all law-abiding citizens that have the right to bear firearms, whether that be handguns, shotguns, or rifles. I think organizing in general is an important aspect of Black life. And so, if there's a block club captain or there's an individual in the community that wants to start something and advocate for armed self-defense and radio patrols, I think that's something that we would definitely advocate for. And I would encourage them to get in contact with us. If we don't have the answers, we definitely know the right people to put them in contact with for them to formally establish something like that. And I think Chad's about to.
Yeah, so I think that what you're really talking about is an emergency support team for a community.
It could be that.
And an emergency support team would consist of folks who are able to defend the community with firearms.
Yeah.
It consists of people who can run communications throughout that entity or throughout that community.
Medical.
Medical training. All of those things are really what you're talking about as an emergency support team. And I think that it's important that communities begin to establish these things for themselves. And it doesn't have to involve everyone owning a gun. Everyone can play their role, right? Some folks can be street medics, meaning being able to triage wounds and triage stuff, right? You can have people who are gardeners and growers growing fruits and vegetables. When things get real thick and it becomes a real live crisis, you got families on that block who can supply food to everyone else. You got folks who can provide armed self-defense for other families and that block or that community as well. So yeah, what you're talking about is an emergency support team, and what that thing really requires is obviously a willingness to participate, understanding what your limitations are and what you can do and cannot do relative to what your role is, what role you want to play, what you feel more comfortable in. And then lastly, training and practicing towards that effort. So if you a street medic and you got a triage kit, make sure you show other people, in case you get hurt, how they can help somebody else who's down. If you are a firearms owner and you want to make sure that you got a decent team around you to train and practice with that team of 4, 5, 6 folks for that armed self-defense of that block or that community. If you're a gardener, then you need to make sure that you're able to produce the fruits and vegetables that folks are going to be able to eat and show other people how to do that as well, so that everyone can mutually benefit from it. So yeah, you talk about an emergency support team, and that's something that we absolutely advocate. Not just a militia, but again, as Kofi talking about, we got a voluminous amount of problems. There are a voluminous amount of ways that we can kind of address some of those things internally within our community. And an emergency support team kind of is a microcosm of some of those things that we can do for ourselves on a small scale to protect our communities.
And I don't know if you're familiar, but some of the call to actions, related to the killings of unarmed Black people is a defund the police movement.
I'm very familiar with that. I don't know if you remember my song from it's like almost like a retired rapper now, but My Own Police on my 2015 album, and that song's been played more and more on Spotify now, which was a whole lot different than my Bobby Seale song Black Fist Up on my 2008 album. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, I'm very familiar with the concept. After I made that song, I became a little bit more familiar with that concept of defunding the police and what that looks like in policing our own community. So I'm my own police,
Yeah, and we can't wait, right? We got to start policing our communities now, or at least building the framework and the foundation pieces if we're going to ever get to that, right?
Yeah,
so,
because the conflicts of bringing an outsider to resolve an internal issue that doesn't understand the culture and context of it, I'm gonna just stay on the surface there, can be deadly, as we see. Now some of the questions I have are like more legal as we get to a close. It's other questions. If I'm a felon in Michigan, what's the state on if I'm expunged? Can I get a firearm? Is it a type of firearm? Can I get a shotgun, a rifle? Can I ever get a handgun again? What are the rules?
Yeah. So as CPL instructors, we're not want to give legal advice.
I got you.
But we encourage everyone to do their due diligence and their research. What's Terry's organization's name?
So our club also has a lot of a positive relationship with a company called Firearms Legal Protection. And Terry Johnson is the vice president of Firearms Legal Protection in terms of their legal development, legal operations. He's based in Detroit, in the area. He's the lawyer that we deal with when he does the legal seminars, right?
Okay.
And firearms legal protection is a way, essentially, that if you have to use your firearm in self-defense, they'll provide you with if you have their service, they'll provide you with an attorney, bail money, and court representation throughout your trial, both civil and criminal defense.
Do I get that by joining Black Bottom?
You can get that at a discounted rate.
Yeah.
So
okay, I'm not gonna pay $29.
No. So you get that at a discounted rate because normally their rates are like $15 a month, but you can get it for $10 a month with us, right? So there are benefits to joining our club, but I don't like to highlight those fringe benefits because the primary benefit is that you get to be your authentic self while exercising your Second Amendment rights without having to turn down your blackness.
Okay. So I need to meet Terry myself and then have some of these questions because I want to ask about marijuana. I want to ask about some of the felonies, some of the background, and also like if a person, we know like if a person is, as we know with COVID-19, a person may get released to my little brother may get out of lockup or my sister or whatever, and I have firearms in the house. What becomes the rule?
Right.
And these are things that I need to know because this goes back to the, as you say, being black, we have to think about the risk of imprisonment, and we know where those rules will go. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So if you come to if anybody listening wants to come to our meeting on the 13th at the Fire Line, that address is 33000 Fort Road in Westland 48185 at 11 o'clock. Terry Johnson is the lawyer. He'll be there. He'll be able to answer your questions.
Okay. All right. Well, I definitely look to meeting him, getting him on Detroit is Different myself. This was a great interview. The last thing I'd say was almost like the thing I led with Kofi. I mean, nowadays, I don't know what's going on. I think it may be my hip-hop culture influencing it, but so many people want to show the guns that they have, and it puzzles me that people are on Instagram brandishing firearms. I want to say it was like a case down in Alabama a couple years back where like a whole group of guys were arrested from this. So I'm just telling you all, hey, I don't think you should be brandishing your firearms on social media, but I don't know what you guys' take is, but at your classes or people, because we live in a social media culture now and everything, is that like are people going live at the range with the Black Bottom Gun Club?
Sometimes people do, and it's not that we discourage or encourage it, because I think it's important to see black folks like you and I, or just a normal black person, doing this same thing that other folks do, right? It's not any different than white folks who go to the gun range, but we want to make it more. Here's what it is: black people are normal, guns are normal, black people with guns are normal, right? And that's really what we're doing, is making it so that black people with guns are just as normal as anybody else here. And I think that, fortunately, Michigan is an open carry state. Yeah. As long as you're following the rules of open carry and not brandishing, because there is a legal definition of what brandishing is in the state, right? You can open carry in Michigan. I personally don't have a problem with it.
We saw that a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, well, we did last week. It was a group of black folks open carrying at the Capitol.
Yeah.
Now I will echo everything Chad said, but I'm also reminded of my cousin that has a Facebook profile of him and his little 9mm. I don't know what it is, but in his profile picture, and so I will say to the youngins that are in the they're on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter, brandishing firearms, got firearms posted next to money. It's not about respectability politics. It's about common sense and discernment, not making yourself a target, because the police, local and state and federal enforcement officers are on social media watching your activity. A lot of that can be used against you in the court of law, especially if you are a known felon and then got the audacity or the stupidity to be posted up with a firearm or with people with firearms. Just think, before you post, especially with a firearm. That's all.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely.
I should have known Chad would have had that response, and I feel you. The Kari response is a little bit less liberal even than Kofi. My thought process is, you don't want not just the element of the police, but also, we have the criminal element in our own community. If it's known that you're a person that carries, I don't think people are going to deal with you as if you're not carrying. And if people start dealing with you as if you are carrying, you have just exponentially heightened the situation where, you know, things can get real.
That's true. I think that situational awareness will trump the element of surprise every day and twice on Sundays. Meaning, if you decide to open carry and you paying attention to your surroundings, you won't be caught off guard as best as you can, right?
Well, but it only takes one time though to get caught off guard.
We're talking about social media.
Yeah.
You know
but that's what he's talking about, social media too. If someone like you're saying, someone knows that you're carrying it and what you have, you know, they may not be as willing to give you an opportunity to react. They may
that's
come
true.
blazing first, right? And it only takes one time to get caught slipping, to not be on your game, to be sitting in your car on your cell phone. It only takes one time. So, you know, situational awareness, but also minimizing your exposure is also a good thing to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you both. This was a great interview. I'm gonna get this up, man. This Fight for Justice series is rolling. You all offered a lot of great information. Black Bottom Gun Club. If you come through Detroit is different, shout me out. But you're gonna see me. I want to see what these brothers are doing. And learn more about this whole thing, because I am completely a novice and unaware of this. Both of you gave a lot more perspective, because I do consider myself as one of those people that has been conditioned to see the dangers of guns in the community. But with everything happening now, the awareness of the safety of it is more present.
Yeah, we
appreciate you, man. Thank you for having us, man. Definitely.
All right. Peace be.
Peace.
Black revolutionaries, distillery owners, Italian fashion retailers, and Motown Grammy winners all share their best stories never before told in any other media outlets on Detroit is Different. Visit DetroitisDifferent.com or download the Detroit is Different app on Apple's App Store or Google's Play Store.